Welcome into the LSU Sports Insider Podcast. Today is Tuesday, March the 25th. I'm Zach Ewing with LSU football beat writer for The Advocate. He's Wilson Alexander.
Howdy.
Talking a little spring football, Wilson. It's getting warm out there, and it's like, I guess it's starting to feel like spring in Baton Rouge.
Absolutely. Oh, the azaleas are all in bloom.
Yeah.
It's a great sight. It is definitely, it's officially springtime. I started putting away like all my winter-y like socks and things that I hadn't yet like put away. Cause I was like, yeah, I'm not going to need these for a while.
I'd be okay with one more week of 50s, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah. Think about where you live, Zach.
Yeah, that's right. So LSU is hard at work. They are working toward an April 14th finale of spring football. We can't call it a spring game. April 12th, sorry. Finale of spring football. And
except not really.
Yeah, it's more of just like an ongoing practice period.
Right, and because of the adjustments that they've already made to the spring game, where it's now just an open practice, Brian Kelly said this past week he's actually going to move two practices that were ahead of the spring game to the week after. So it's like this event on April 12th isn't even the grand conclusion of spring football. It's just one more. It's just the only time that fans will be able to come to Tiger Stadium and watch. And that's the thing. You're also going to have to come to Tiger Stadium if you want to see any of it, because they're not going to be broadcasting this on television. That's a change that's been made pretty much around the country, that these things are getting taken off TV. Teams aren't wanting to show anything at all, and LSU is one of them too.
So pay no attention to the words on your screen right now. It is not an April 12th finale. That was made before Brian Kelly said that. But I do like it when the world kind of agrees with me about something being nonsensical, and showing spring football games on television was like the most boring thing in the world to me.
Well, you had to fill up the SEC Network's programming somehow in the summer.
Show me old games, man. I'll watch like a week 8 game between Mississippi State and South Carolina. Like, yeah. I don't need to see a spring game 7 times on SEC Network. So I'm glad for the change. I don't know how much it materially changes things for LSU. I mean, we can say the coaches don't want to show anything. I don't know.
They never really showed anything in the spring game anyway.
Exactly. So, yeah. But from the few open practices that you have seen, Wilson, and we've had Reed Darcy out there, we've had some other reporters out there as well, what maybe at a high level has stuck out to you about this year's Tigers?
Well, just that the transfers that they've brought in are immediately like on the 2 deep, expected to play and have key roles. I mean, in the past, that hasn't always been evident because LSU hasn't always brought in sort of this caliber of transfer, especially last spring, where like they hadn't brought in a ton of transfers. And I think the juxtaposition between last spring and this spring is very different in terms of just how many new faces are coming in right away and playing already, like leading their position groups in a way, especially like you think about the defensive end room. Like right away, the front of the line is Patrick Payton and Jack Pyburn and Jamari Butler. And those are 3 new guys. And so I feel like, they're also blending that in with some returning players like a Garrett Nussmeier. And I think from a 30,000-foot view, it's hard to really get a sense of, okay, is this team going to be better? But it does seem like there's more talent out on the field. And talking to people around the program, they think there's more talent out on the field than there was a year ago, especially in certain spots and like at cornerback, for instance. And so I feel like LSU has set up itself to be competitive this year.
Yeah, and that's a good transition into kind of the first thing we wanted to talk about, and that's individuals who are standing out in the spring. And I think you mentioned cornerback, like DJ Pickett fairly or unfairly got some Derek Stingley comparisons when he signed at LSU. Like, hey, can he come in and make an immediate impact? And we should put a disclaimer out there with all of this that it's spring football, yeah. And do not take any of it as gospel. But DJ Pickett looks really, really good. He looks like the real deal.
He does. Gosh, he's 6'4". There was a rep in one-on-ones recently where he got beat initially by, I think it was Barry and Brown, who's really fast, Kentucky transfer. And then he caught up and used his length to knock the pass away. And you have to have that technique as a corner. You're not just going to stick to a guy his entire route every single time. Right. Sometimes you have to recover and have some of that closing speed to make up for something that happens earlier in that route during that play. And he did on that one. That was impressive. It's limited the team period stuff that we've seen. So it's not really like you've seen him taking a ton of reps with the ones and that kind of thing. But it's also so early in the off season that it's not like he's being pushed down the depth chart or something. It's like there's just a lot of competition going there, and he's clearly in the middle of that very early on as a freshman, and we'll kind of see how he continues to progress throughout the rest of the offseason. But he's already somebody who you want to keep an eye on because physically he is impressive.
Who else do you want to talk about in this vein as far as guys who are opening some eyes in the spring?
Yeah, I'm gonna. A name that comes to mind is Bauer Sharp, Oklahoma tight end. In terms of the transfers, he's probably up there in terms of like the most number of plays made. LSU even did some interesting stuff within a goal line team period this past weekend with him, where he got basically took like a little shovel pass on a jet sweep at the goal line. It's your tight end. He's got some athleticism. They can do some different things with him. We've seen some highlight clips that LSU's released of him making some impressive catches, and I don't think it's just smoke. Like he's certainly going to have a role in this offense, and LSU he's looked good here early in the spring. Also in that tight end room, Trades Green has too. I mean, that's as a returning player, that's a guy who looks like he's ready to take a step forward as a sophomore. We saw it in the bowl game, and it feels like that's just a continuing to move forward in his development here in the spring. On the defensive side of the ball, some guys that stand out. Mansour Delane at corner. Talk about cornerbacks. He's somebody who you can tell that he's played a lot of football.
Virginia Tech transfer?
That's right. Yeah, and he's physical. We've mostly seen him at cornerback. He has the versatility to play nickel, maybe even play safety, but he's at cornerback right now, and seems to be doing a good job there. He's often like one of the first guys up in one-on-ones, and he holds his own. And you see that in a few spots. Tamarcus Cooley is a guy who we haven't seen like a ton of this spring, but like we saw at one point he made an interception, and he seems like he does a pretty good job in one-on-ones. Again, these are all just like little glimpses of things, but those are some of the initial names that really stand out. I mean, I could keep like rattling off more and more and more, but I feel like that could get a little bit repetitive.
Which, I mean, I guess it's a good thing that they have these guys who are standing out. Now, again, it's against your own team. Take the spring grain of salt. But we wrote a story about him. You can read it at theadvocate.com/LSU. And he ended last season so well. And it seems like Chris Hilton's really still continuing that ascension too.
You're seeing the difference that he makes when he's healthy. Yeah, he's just got speed, so much speed that again, back to a one-on-one rep, like, I mean, just can burn people deep. And, but we saw last year going into the season that he had maybe come along as a complete wide receiver and not just your vertical deep threat, to be able to do a little bit more, be well-rounded. And he's somebody who is out there with the first team offense. He hasn't necessarily, I think, although there was one play, he made this absurd catch over, I can't remember who it was in coverage, but he mossed a guy last weekend. And he, it's just that thing though with Chris where it's like, okay, we've seen that capability is there. Can he just stay healthy? Because it feels like it's always kind of coming on. It's coming on. Here comes Chris Hilton, and then he gets hurt. And so, yes, once again, Chris Hilton looks good. Can he stay on the field? We'll just have to kind of let time play out on that one. If he can, then he is set up, I think, for a productive year.
This year's breakout player for the third straight season, Chris Hilton. I'm joking, but yeah, you're right. I mean, he's got to stay on the field, obviously, and then consistency is another part of that. So it will be interesting to see him, and kind of transitioning
Real
into
quick.
Yeah, go ahead, Wilson.
Actually, no, we'll bring up Cohen Eccles when we get to the offensive line and the competitions there.
Yeah, I was going there right now. Let's some of these guys who are standing out at the same position, and again, you get a mix of going against the ones and the twos and the threes in practice, and so it can be a little bit difficult to tell. We don't get to see everything either, but a big part of spring football is kind of determining this depth chart and what it's going to look like, at least headed into fall camp. Now, it could change again, but some of these major position battles, offensive line, secondary, where do things stand and how have they changed since spring started?
Yeah, the offensive line has been pretty consistent, actually. Left to right, you're looking at left tackle Tyree Adams, left guard Paul Mabenga, center DJ Chester still a lot of the time. People might hear that and think like, well, wait, wasn't he going to kick over to guard? They're still going through a competition right now between him and Braylon Moore. Braylon Moore, the Virginia Tech transfer, who Brian Kelly told me before the spring started was going to play center and that DJ Chester was going to compete to start at guard. They're still kind of going back and forth, and Braylon Moore is often with the twos. We'll see if that changes over the course of the spring. But for now, DJ Chester is still fighting for that center spot, and that I think is what you would expect from Brad Davis. Wants competition, wants these guys to have to really go out and earn their keep and their spot on the team. The one change from the start of the spring to now has been at right guard. Bordelon, as the sort of more experienced veteran guy, was there initially. Cohen Eccles is now a second-year player who, I remember Miles Frazier, the former LSU lineman, telling us during bowl prep last year, he was like, this guy's physicality really stands out. And that's notable because LSU is trying to be more physical on the offensive line in general this year. They need to be able to push people off the ball, Joe Sloan was saying today, in order to get the run game going. I mean, that's kind of the catalyst. There's a lot that goes into the run game. Garrett Nussmeier needs to make some better decisions as a quarterback in the run game as well. They need to have good blocking on the edges. But, things start up front with the ability to run the football. And Cohen Eccles, as a guy who's known as being physical, he's getting those first team reps at right guard right now. And then right tackle is Weston Davis. And this is a big spring for Weston Davis, a redshirt freshman, former highly recruited player who is now going to get the chance to start at right tackle. We haven't really been able to tell, is he doing well? We just haven't seen enough, but he continues to be out there as the first team right tackle. And a couple of other things to note about the offensive line, just guys who I think could put themselves in the mix. Josh Thompson, the Northwestern transfer, just recently joined the team last week after finishing up his coursework. And he's been the second team right tackle in his first few practices. But I don't expect that to he's not going to be a backup this year. But it's just a matter of, does he play guard? Does he play tackle? Some of it depends on where he looks best. Some of it depends on, the other players on the team, like what becomes their best configuration. We'll see. But he stands out as a guy who has some experience. I think can just probably slide in right away as a starter on this offensive line. And then everybody else is kind of pretty young. I mean, like Carius Kern is your second team left tackle right now, but is he going to be a starter, or could he kind of come on as maybe your sixth or seventh guy? Is probably, I think, more likely as a freshman, at least at this point. That's just sort of where things stand with the offensive line.
I mean, you hear coaches and offensive line coaches in particular say we just want the best 5 out there, and then we'll figure out the positions later. And I wonder if that's some of what we're seeing with DJ Chester. Is he one of the best 5 guys? He probably is. Where do we put him? Maybe that matters a little bit less than making sure that we have the most talented 5 guys out there.
Yeah, potentially. And I mean, in Chester, it's like, do you want to, if you moved him into, say, left guard, is Paul Mabinga not one of your best 5 then? That's a guy who started a few games last year. He was up and down, first time starter, had some moments where he really struggled, especially like in the Florida game. But those are all decisions that Brad Davis is going to have to make.
Yeah, and that's like, obviously there's some tackles who have never played center before. You're not going to put them there, and vice versa. Like, there's a limit to that. But in general, you do want to have the most talented guys out there, and that's probably what they're figuring out right now. How about in the secondary? You mentioned DJ Pickett at the top, and Mansour Delane. These newcomers kind of fit in with some returnees who were, better in 2024 than they were in 23, but that's still a position where I think if LSU had its druthers, they would really revamp it and increase the talent.
Oh, yeah. And they tried to do that at corner, bringing in Delane and signing Pickett and bringing in Jakeem Jackson from Florida. Oh. Jakeem is somebody who we've seen with the first-team defense a good bit now. You've sort of got to – I think LSU's coaches feel better about the cornerback room than they did this time a year ago, and especially 2 years ago. I mean, they haven't always had DBU has not been there for the last few years, and I feel like they think that it's coming around. And we'll see how things continue to develop. But like Jakeem Jackson was a guy who started twice at Florida last year before he got hurt. So there's some talent there. Corey Raymond recruited him at Florida. So he clearly thinks there's a guy there who's worth continuing to develop. And so the cornerback room, we're a long ways off from knowing who's going to start game 1 against Clemson. But you can tell there's like that top 4, which is Jakeem Jackson, Mansour Delane, DJ Pickett, and Ashton Stamps. Stamps is a guy who started 16 games over the past 2 years, and we'll see what kind of role he can carve out for himself this season. That's sort of your top 4 there. Safety is the one that's a little bit more interesting and a little bit more uncertain. Tamarcus Cooley comes in from NC State, and he kind of shifting from nickel to deep safety. And Jordan Gilbert's out this spring with a shoulder injury. And so there's been a lot of chances for Deshaun Spears and Javian Toviano in particular to get on the field and show that they have taken a step forward, and maybe they can actually, be difference makers. Whether or not they can is kind of key for this team. Otherwise, you're probably going back to Jordan Gilbert and Cooley and all that. And so it's going to be interesting also to see if LSU brings in a safety in the spring portal window. They only got the one in December with Cooley, and they might need another one, but they're at least getting a chance to kind of see throughout the spring if that is a need for this team based on what Toviano and what Spears are capable of. I personally would still try to find one because it's a position group that needs to your point a minute ago, they need to continue to add talent there. It's not at the level that it needs to be at yet.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It's a good way to frame it. Like at corner, just look at Ashton Stamps, who was maybe your top guy a year ago, if not
I'd say number 2 behind Zy Alexander.
Top 2, sure. But now he's like down at 4th. I mean, you have
third or 4th,
clearly increased the talent.
Yeah,
I mean, he's been pushed down the depth chart. It's not like he's gotten worse. You've just brought in better talent. Have they done that at safety? That's more of a question mark.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, it's just it's a position that is still kind of up in the air. I think if you going into the rest of the offseason, we've gotten through enough of spring ball now where it's pretty clear, what are these teams' question marks? And it's still okay, we just don't know what this offensive line is going to be because they have 4 new starters and your 5th starter in Chester might play a different position. And the other one is safety. I mean, we just don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty there. Have they improved? We'll see. With Gilbert, didn't play great his first year at LSU after transferring over from A&M. But there's some thought that maybe that had to do with the shoulder injury, getting that repaired. Maybe he can be more physical. One thing to note about the safeties, they struggled so much last year with their pursuit angles to the ball and with tackling in space. And Brian Kelly, anyway, says that they've gotten better in that regard, that he's been able to see a change there at this point in the spring.
Yeah, which, again, he gets paid the big bucks, but figuring out what you're seeing in spring practice and what's real and what's not can be difficult. A 2-part question to kind of wrap this segment up. Any other position battles that have caught your eye and maybe the answer is the same, positions where you think LSU will attack in the spring portal?
I'll be interested to see if they go after a defensive tackle. They didn't sign one other than Sadir Mitchell. They signed Sadir Mitchell. Excuse me. Sorry, Sadir Mitchell. Because I was which I really shouldn't forget him. He's had a nice spring. He's he didn't play a whole lot at Texas, but he's huge. And we were watching them this morning, and they were doing a drill where the offensive lineman had to combo block against a defensive tackle. It's set up for the offensive line to win, right? It's 2-on-1. And he is hard to move. And so that's interesting to see if he's somebody who can at least put himself into the rotation there at defensive tackle. Also to note at defensive tackle, Ahmad Bro has been impressive. I mean, we saw him as a freshman. This is a guy who just so clearly wants to do everything he can to maximize his potential. There was a couple plays today where during that drill I mentioned a second ago, he gets his helmet ripped off and he's just fighting through it and everything. That's somebody who looks like he is doing all he can to take a step forward into year 2 after having a good freshman season. I mean, that's a guy who gained 40 pounds going into last year in the offseason just so he could know, because he knew he wasn't going to play at defensive end. And he was like, all right, well, they can put me defensive tackle. That's just to illustrate the mindset of Ahmad. Yeah. I'm going way off of topic, off of your question though. So defensive, but that's kind of, defensive tackle. Dominic McKinley's also in the mix there. Sean Washington has made some nice plays during teamwork. But we'll just see if that might be a spot that they address. And the other one that I think everybody wants to know is the receiver. Well, to this point in the spring, the first team wide receivers have been consistently Xavion Thomas, Aaron Anderson, and Chris Hilton. And you think, well, wait, they brought in all these receivers. Where are they? Barian Brown has been working with the second team, getting some run with the ones as well when they kind of rotate from what we've been able to see. I think that he's going to be just fine. The one that's interesting is Nick Anderson, though. I don't know. Maybe he's kind of banged up or something. He has not done a lot this spring. This morning, they had just 20 minutes of open practice. So it's hard to tell. But even that combined with some of the other open practices that we've seen, he's not really getting a ton of run with the first team offense. Now, to be fair, a year ago, CJ Daniels wasn't on the top of the depth chart, and then he ends up becoming a starter once he kind of got hang of the playbook. But yeah, that's Nick Anderson, at least to this point, just hasn't made a huge impact on what they're doing. But there's a long way to go in the offseason. They're not going to bring another wide receiver. They're done with wide receivers, but that's sort of where things are. Oh, and Destin Hill too. Destin Hill, who came in from Florida State, he's been getting a lot of kind of in the mix with that top group, getting run with the second team. He's put himself in position to be considered for a role in the rotation.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if that's a spot where things may change in fall camp. As you said,
I would expect them to
learn the
become
playbook, and then Garrett Nussmeier gets more comfortable with those guys.
Yeah. I mean, to real quick though, I mean, Xavier Thomas has had a good spring from what we've been able to see. Aaron Anderson continues to show what he did last year, so it's like it's not going to be easy to crack, push past those guys. But I think that really like LSU is going to have 5, maybe even 6 deep at receiver, and just be able to kind of steadily rotate guys through. As Joe Sloan said today, he's like, we're going to need all of them to get through the season.
Well, that's kind of the story of the passing game. We did have kind of an interesting development in the running game that we're going to get to. Want to take a break first. We owe you a quick 30-second break. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. It is the LSU Tigers at NOLA.com YouTube channel. Hit the like button while you're down there. Leave a comment what you have read that has stuck out to you about spring practice. We'd like to hear from you too. So let's take a quick break, and we'll be back right after this.
There's no better place to parlay than Caesars Sportsbook. With quick picks, you can tap right into pre-built, ready-to-bet parlays right from the home screen. And if you miss tip-off, no worries. You can play same-game parlays live during the action. Plus, it's never been easier to find and bet on the biggest matchups of the day, so you can keep up with all the action. Caesars Sportsbook, proud partner of the NBA and the only sportsbook app with Caesars Rewards. Download it today.
Okay, back on the LSU Sports Insider podcast, Zach Ewing with Wilson Alexander. He is our LSU football beat writer, and LSU is a little more than halfway through spring practice.
I think we're like 2/3 or so.
Yeah, about 2/3 of the way through. And we are just kind of talking some developments and takeaways and things like that. Again, with the huge caveat that this is the spring and things change, and sometimes in November, you're like, remember back in the spring when we thought this, and it's just totally off.
You know what's kind of nice about not having the spring game is that you're not going to have that like spring game star who everybody suddenly thinks is going to be like the next coming of
third string running back who you're like, wow, he's going
to be great. It's like, and you have to kind of tamp down everybody's expectations. You're not going to have to deal with that sort of what gets created by a spring game sometimes, which is nice.
There was an interesting bit of news that came out earlier this week or late last week. John Emery, LSU's running back, who tore his ACL early last season, has announced he's coming back for his 6th year or seventh year of college football. He was a COVID kid and all of that. And it's interesting, especially because Brian Kelly kind of came out and said, hey, we're going to support him. We're going to try to find him a home, but it's not going to be here.
Yeah, he's not coming. He's not going to play at LSU. And that was sort of, I mean, this was something that LSU wasn't aware that he wanted to play a 7th year before his announcement came out, and they've moved on. He was not listed on the roster, so it's not like a situation really where he's saying he's coming back and they were saving, like, he wasn't on the team. And as Brian Kelly said when asked about him the other day, as you were saying a minute ago, they're going to be supportive and help in any way they can. Kelly said that this is somebody who can help a team in the Power Four, but it's just not going to be here because Brian Kelly's words were they are set with where they're at in terms of the running back position. And that makes sense when you look at it. Caden Durham's coming back as a sophomore, who's going to be your first string running back. Caleb Jackson is somebody who, put on too much weight last year, but he's kind of seems to have maybe, trimmed that down a little bit. Can he get back to the form that he showed as a freshman? Some people around the program think like, okay, he's had a nice spring here. This looks better. But then you've also got Harlan Berry, the 5-star freshman, JT Lindsay coming in, another freshman who's highly thought of. So there's 4 running backs right there. And you might get a 5th back with Trey Holly, even though he'd be out for a year at that point. Depending on what happens with his court case this summer, that he might be able to return. And so that's 5 running backs right there. And it's just sort of gotten to a point where it's just they've moved on. But so John will look to play somewhere else. We'll kind of see what comes of that as they're very early in that process, as agent said, of figuring out where that's going to be. But he's got some time. Also, as a graduate transfer, he doesn't have to hit the portal when that opens in April. Like, he can go ahead and start working on this now. That's not really relevant to him in his situation because he's already graduated.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where he lands because I think he is still, like BK hinted at, he's good enough to help if not a Power 5 team, then a good group of five. Like he is going to be a factor somewhere.
There's a roster spot for him somewhere in college football.
It's just that it's not really fair to the guys you have on the roster. And fairness aside, like NIL dollars and all this stuff goes around, and Caden Durham had a breakout year, and you bring in Harlem Berry, and like you're not going to tell those guys that their playing time's being cut into at this stage.
Yeah, and I mean, LSU might want to think about bringing in a running back for depth. I don't know that it's necessary, especially if Holly were to come back. Like, that's 5 right there. Do you need a 6th scholarship running back? I don't really think so. And even if Holly didn't play, but you also, in terms of the numbers, I think they're okay to get through the season. But that also is kind of contingent upon like Caleb Jackson and Harlem Berry and JT Lindsey being able to contribute, and like Caleb in particular, like playing better than he did as a sophomore. So it'll be interesting to see in the spring if LSU looks for a running back at all, try to bring in somebody who can just add a little bit of quality depth. But that's really the only other thing that they would need to add to that position. They are, I think, pretty good where they're at right now, especially if all those guys can continue to improve.
Speaking of Caleb Jackson, he's the perfect example of the guy who looks so good in spring and then especially in fall camp that we all think.
Well, gosh, he looked good in the season as a freshman.
He's gonna be the guy, and then it ends up being Caden Durham who kind of takes that leap instead. So again, we're speculating at this point, but it's what we got, and I think it's kind of fun to do. And so to that end, Wilson, let's wrap things up with what you said is like lingering questions in the spring. We mentioned we're about 2/3 of the way through. What would you still like to see answered, and what are you still looking for in these last couple of weeks?
Okay, so I don't have to like think about lingering questions that apply all the way to like the season, right? I can just focus on like the rest of spring ball.
We got plenty of time for that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, here for the rest of spring practice, the first thing I'm looking for is what I've been looking for all spring. Does the offensive line change? Are these transfers, Braylon Moore and Josh Thompson, going to become starters? Is Weston Davis at right tackle going to look like a viable option there? Or do you actually need to look for another offensive lineman in the transfer portal? Or, is that where Josh Thompson's going to need to play? That's probably the top thing, is the offensive line. Also interested to see, I haven't just gotten the best sense of it so far, but they bring in these 3 transfer defensive ends. And then Gabe Relaford is back too. There is certainly some potential in that group if Patrick Payton can play like he did 2 years ago at Florida State. If Jack Pyburn can continue to sort of develop his all-around game, he's already somebody who can set the edge. My goodness, he blew up an outside run not too long ago. But I'm interested to kind of continue to watch that position unfold. I mean, some of it's what we've already been talking about. Yeah. Can we get a real sense of the secondary's better? Can we see if these transfer wide receivers can sort of put themselves into the starting offense? And there's a lot of things that we have lingering questions that apply to the season. Is the run game going to be better? Can they score touchdowns in the red zone? Can they push people off the ball more than they did a year ago? Is the defense in general going to improve? But in the tackling in the secondary, but those just aren't really things that we're going to be able to answer. So it's I've already said all those. I would like to be able to find answers to those, but we're just not going to have them soon. So in terms of where guys are playing, I think it's kind of what we can continue to sort of find out about here in the spring, that depth chart, as you were saying. And the offensive line is probably the one in particular that stands out as to what is that going to look like here in 2 weeks.
Yeah, the O-line is just a fascinating situation because, as you said, they've got 4 newcomers. We could be sitting here on August the 30th saying, I love what I see from LSU's quarterback with Garrett Nussmeier coming back. I love the receiving core. You said it's so deep. The running backs room is so talented. The defense looks better. They brought in all this talent in the secondary. But what about that O-line? Boy, can it wreck a team if that isn't on point.
It can. I mean, it can be your Achilles heel, and LSU needs to make sure that it's not. So big. Brad Davis needs to earn his money this year. The offensive line coach. And it's funny. He's trying. I can tell you that, man. Watching him this morning, 8 a.m. fog covering the field. Everybody seems to kind of a little sleepy, and Brad Davis is just ripping people at 8 in the morning.
He's had his monsters for the day.
Yeah, he's ready to go, man. So he's working on the offensive line quite a bit, and it'll be interesting to see how it continues to shake out.
Yeah, and I like hearing, hey, we're going to be more physical and try to push people off the ball, and and be an attacking offensive lineman. The offensive linemen like that stuff. But again, spring practice, we're going to have to see it in 6 months from now. So
Yeah. Also, one thing to note, I have seen Garrett Nussmeier scramble twice.
Ooh.
Twice this spring. He has taken off. He's using his legs.
Now he's wearing the red jerseys, so he knows he's not going to get hit.
Yeah, but we'll see if he does that a little bit more this year. He needs to. He's recognized that he needs to situationally. He's not going to be Jaden Daniels, but for LSU's offense to keep people off balance in the run game, he needs to do just a little bit more. And I have seen him scramble twice this spring, which has been a refreshing sight.
No, I think that's a good note. That's a good note to end on. We will be back kind of to wrap up spring football here in a couple of weeks and pick Wilson's brain about what else he's learned. It may be some of the same stuff. It may be some new stuff. We'll see what happens. It's a busy time of year, but we do want to give spring football its due. So for our producer today was Alex Lee. He's Wilson Alexander covering LSU spring football. You can catch all of his work at theadvocate.com/LSU and right here on the LSU Tigers at NOLA.com YouTube channel. I'm Zach Ewing, and we will see you next time.